Sarah thought she had found the perfect man in David, but when her best friend Emma went missing, everything she believed about their relationship was shattered. As the investigation deepened, Sarah's trust in David slowly unraveled, leading her to a chilling truth. The man she loved might be the one responsible for Emma's disappearance. Sarah and David's relationship was the kind of love story that seemed too perfect to be real. They met one evening at a small cafe in town, a place where locals gathered to sip coffee and chat. Sarah had been sitting alone reading a book when David walked in. He was tall with sharp features and a calm, collected demeanor that immediately caught her attention. After a few minutes, he walked up to her table and complimented her book choice. Sarah, shy by nature, was caught off guard but found his confidence charming. They spent the next few hours talking, laughing, and discovering shared interests. It was one of those rare encounters that felt like fate. Within weeks, they were inseparable. They went on long walks, shared meals at their favorite restaurants, and spent lazy afternoons watching movies at home. Sarah was over the moon. David seemed perfect. He was attentive and affectionate, always making her feel like the most important person in the world. They were a picture-perfect couple, and everyone who saw them together agreed. Friends, family, even strangers noticed how well they got along. It was easy to believe they had found something special, something that would last. David, on the surface, appeared to be the ideal boyfriend. He was thoughtful, bringing her flowers for no reason, always knowing the right things to say and making her feel secure in ways Sarah had never experienced before. He was also protective, which Sarah appreciated at first. He'd check in on her if she was running late, and if she went out with friends, he'd always offer to drive her there, making sure she was safe. His affection made her feel loved, and she found comfort in his constant presence. But as time went on, Sarah started noticing small, odd behaviors. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on immediately, but something about the way David acted began to make her feel uneasy. It was subtle at first. An uncomfortable look when she mentioned a friend, a suggestion that maybe she should stay home rather than go out with certain people. His jealousy was always veiled in concern, as though he wanted to protect her from harm, but Sarah began to wonder if his need for control was something more sinister. David was also overly concerned with her schedule. He always wanted to know exactly where she was going and when she would be back, sometimes asking the same question multiple times. At first, Sarah thought it was just his way of caring, but over time, the constant questioning began to feel like surveillance. And it wasn't just her schedule. David seemed to know everything about her life, down to the smallest details. He would bring up things she had told him weeks ago, as if he was keeping track of her every word. It wasn't that he was intentionally trying to be controlling, but the longer they were together, the more Sarah began to feel like she was under constant observation. She couldn't shake the feeling that David knew more about her than she realized. Despite these growing concerns, Sarah dismissed the thoughts. She told herself that David loved her, that he was just being protective because he cared. And maybe, she reasoned, she was overthinking things. But there was always this nagging voice in the back of her mind that told her something wasn't right. She tried to push it aside, telling herself that every relationship had its quirks and David was just a bit more attentive than most. It wasn't until later, when things started to unravel, that Sarah would realize just how much she had ignored, and how much she had missed in those early months of their relationship. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect in fact. But as Sarah would eventually learn, sometimes perfection hides the most terrifying secrets. One evening, Sarah's best friend, Emma, went missing. The two had been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets, dreams, and an unbreakable bond. Emma was the adventurous one, always out exploring the world, trying new things, and meeting new people. Sarah, on the other hand, was more reserved, often content with quiet nights at home or long, peaceful walks through the park. Despite their differences, they balanced each other perfectly. Emma's energy brought Sarah out of her shell, and Sarah's calmness provided Emma with a sense of stability. It was unusual for Emma to go missing without any notice, especially since she had plans that evening. She had mentioned to Sarah that she was meeting someone she'd recently started dating. The man's name was Jared, and while Sarah hadn't met him, Emma had spoken about him fondly. She'd told Sarah that they had great chemistry, and it seemed like things were moving quickly between them. Emma had even hinted that Jared might be someone special. Sarah didn't think much of it at the time, assuming that Emma would be back later that night just as she always had in the past. But when Emma didn't respond to her texts and calls, Sarah grew concerned. She tried to push the worry aside, reasoning that maybe Emma had just turned off her phone or lost track of time. Still, the longer Sarah waited, the more unsettled she became. Emma had always been responsible about letting people know where she was, especially Sarah. By midnight, Sarah was frantic. She called Emma's parents, hoping they might have heard from her, but they were just as worried. Emma's father, a calm but firm man, had already started calling around to places she might have gone. After another hour passed with no word, Sarah decided to contact the police. Her heart pounded as she dialed the emergency number, the words catching in her throat. The police arrived shortly after, taking Emma's details and filing a missing persons report. The investigation began, but there was little to go on. All they knew was that Emma had been at a park near the city, a place she frequented for its quiet and peaceful atmosphere. She was last seen around 9 p.m., just before her phone went silent. The police scoured the area, speaking to witnesses, but no one had seen anything suspicious. As the hours turned into days, the police found no new leads. Sarah felt as though she was sinking into a nightmare. She replayed every detail of the evening in her mind, trying to find something, anything, that might explain where Emma had gone. Emma had been happy, excited about the possibility of a new relationship. So what had happened? Why hadn't she returned home? Through it all, David remained unusually calm. He was supportive, but something about his attitude struck Sarah as strange. He offered to drive her to the police station when she couldn't stand being alone, and he kept telling her that everything would be okay. But the more Sarah saw David's behavior, the more her gut told her something wasn't right. He was too calm, almost detached, in the face of such a crisis. His words were kind, but there was an underlying coldness in his actions that Sarah couldn't ignore. It wasn't just his behavior that unsettled her. It was his constant presence. He was always there, hovering just a little too close, offering his help and support at every turn. When Sarah mentioned going to the park to look for clues, David insisted on coming with her, despite the fact that he didn't know Emma or have any particular reason to be involved in the search. Sarah tried to brush it off as concern, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Days passed, and Emma's disappearance became an increasingly cold case. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that David knew more than he was letting on. She couldn't pinpoint why, but something in the way he acted, his insistence on always being around, his inability to truly express concern for Emma, left her with a growing sense of dread. She didn't know it then, but these feelings would be the first warning signs that something much darker was unfolding right in front of her. At the time, Sarah couldn't bring herself to believe that David could be involved in anything sinister. He was the man she loved, the person she trusted with her deepest secrets. But the longer Emma remained missing, the more Sarah began to question everything she thought she knew about David. And the more she started to wonder if the person she had come to rely on was hiding something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Sarah's growing suspicions about David intensified one evening, when she made an unexpected discovery. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Emma disappeared, and Sarah's sense of unease had only grown. The police had found no new leads, and every attempt to reach Emma's new boyfriend, Jared, had been met with dead ends. Emma's absence weighed heavily on Sarah, but it wasn't just the loss of her friend that disturbed her. It was the nagging feeling that David might know more than he was letting on. One evening, while tidying up their home, Sarah decided to clean David's office. It was a small room at the back of the house, filled with old books, files, and various personal items. David had always been a bit secretive about the contents of the room, but Sarah had never thought to question it. He often spent hours in there, working on projects or making phone calls, and she never pried. However, that night, as she organized a stack of papers on his desk, something caught her eye. A small, blood-stained scarf was wedged between two folders, hidden in the corner of the drawer. The scarf was light blue, the kind Emma often wore on chilly days, and it made Sarah's stomach turn when she saw the dark stains on the fabric. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no way David could have missed it. It was tucked away so carefully as though he'd meant to hide it from her. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, the reality of what she was holding slowly sinking in. She couldn't immediately process the implications of the discovery. Could it really be Emma's? Was David involved in something she couldn't even begin to understand? After a few moments of standing there in shock, Sarah forced herself to calm down. She needed answers. There had to be a reasonable explanation. She told herself that over and over as she carefully folded the scarf and placed it back into the drawer. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe it was just something David had forgotten about. But deep down, Sarah knew that what she had found wasn't something she could ignore. The next day, she continued searching through David's things, desperate for any clue that could explain his odd behavior. Her mind raced with questions. Had David known about Emma's disappearance from the beginning? Why hadn't he ever seemed as worried as she was? What had he been doing in the days following Emma's vanishing? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The scarf could be linked to Emma, but there was no way David would have kept it unless he had something to do with her disappearance. Sarah's mind felt like a storm of uncertainty and fear. She had always trusted David, but now with every passing moment that trust was eroding. Her heart ached with the idea that the man she loved, the one who had been so attentive and loving, could be capable of something so horrifying. She tried to push the thought out of her head, but the evidence was piling up. And it wasn't just the scarf. It was the way David had behaved throughout the search for Emma, how he always seemed just a little too calm, a little too eager to control the situation. When David came home that evening, Sarah was already on edge. She watched him closely, noticing how he avoided eye contact, how his voice trembled slightly when he spoke. He was acting strange, more distant than usual. When she asked him about the scarf, his face went pale. He stammered, trying to explain it away, but his answer didn't feel right. He said he had no idea where it came from, but Sarah knew he was lying. Her suspicions had never been clearer. David was hiding something, and the truth was slipping further out of reach with every passing moment. As the days went on, Sarah became more determined to uncover what was happening. She could no longer deny the truth, that David had been involved in something sinister. But even as she pieced together the fragments of the mystery, she couldn't shake the fear that the worst was yet to come. David's calmness, his strange behavior, and now the blood-stained scarf. All these signs were leading her to a horrifying realization. The man she loved, the man she had trusted more than anyone, might very well be the one responsible for Emma's disappearance. But Sarah couldn't yet bring herself to confront him. She wasn't ready to face the possibility that everything she thought she knew about her life, about their relationship, could be a lie. The truth was too terrifying, too impossible to accept. But the longer she waited, the more undeniable it became. The more Sarah thought about the clues she had found, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore them any longer. Emma's disappearance was no longer just a tragic event. It had become a mystery that pointed directly to David. The scarf, the strange way he had been acting, the phone number she had found written on a scrap of paper, it all seemed to connect back to him in ways she couldn't fully understand yet. But the evidence was there. Sarah's anxiety grew with each passing day, and she felt herself sinking into a pit of suspicion and fear. She began digging deeper, trying to find anything that would give her more insight into David's behavior. One night, after he had fallen asleep, she went through his phone. It wasn't something she had ever done before. She had always trusted him too much to snoop. But desperation made her throw caution to the wind. As she scrolled through his messages, Sarah's heart raced. It didn't take long for her to come across a string of texts between David and someone named Jared, the same name from the phone number she had found weeks ago. The messages were brief, cryptic, and unnervingly casual. At first she thought they were just about mundane things, but then Sarah read a message that sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Everything is set. It will be done tonight. Don't worry, she'll be taken care of." The words haunted her as she reread them. Taken care of? What did that mean? Sarah's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as she scrolled back to earlier messages between David and Jared. There was mention of a meeting at the park the night Emma had disappeared. Sarah felt dizzy, her breath catching in her throat. David had known where Emma would be, and he had even been in contact with Jared, the man she had just started dating. The more she read, the clearer it became. David wasn't just involved in Emma's disappearance. He had orchestrated it. Sarah felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. This couldn't be real. She had to be misinterpreting something, right? But the more she examined the messages, the more she realized that there was no way around it. David had lied to her from the beginning. He had been planning Emma's disappearance, and likely worse. The way he'd been acting, calm, distant, almost detached. It all made sense now. He wasn't just worried about her missing friend. He was hiding his own guilt, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. Her hands shook as she tried to process the information. She had always known David as the man who cared for her, the man who had seemed to love her. She had trusted him implicitly, never questioning his actions or motives. But now, in the wake of her discovery, everything she thought she knew felt like a lie. He had been pretending, hiding his true nature behind the mask of a loving boyfriend. And all the while, he was planning something horrific. The weight of the realization crushed her. She sat there, paralyzed with disbelief, staring at the screen in front of her. Her mind screamed at her to do something, to tell the police, to confront David, but the words wouldn't come. She felt trapped. If she confronted him now, he might deny everything, or worse, become violent. The man she had loved and trusted might be capable of anything. For the next few days, Sarah became consumed with fear and uncertainty. Every time David left the house, she wondered if he was going somewhere to hide evidence or to meet with Jared again. She couldn't stop thinking about Emma, about what had happened to her, and about how deep David's involvement went. One afternoon, she found herself standing in front of David's office again, staring at the locked door. The air felt thick with tension as she debated whether to continue her search. But deep down, she knew she had to know the full truth. There could be no more doubt, no more waiting. Sarah had to find out what had happened to Emma, even if it meant uncovering the darkest secrets of the person she had loved most in the world. As Sarah opened the door to his office, She felt a wave of dread wash over her. This time there would be no turning back. She was about to discover things that would change her life forever, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what she would find. But she knew one thing for certain. David had been hiding something, and she couldn't let him continue to live his lie any longer. The truth, no matter how terrifying, had to come out. The day Sarah decided to confront the truth was a turning point in her life that she would never forget. After days of quiet panic and sleepless nights, she could no longer ignore the signs. The discovery of the text messages between David and Jared had shattered her sense of reality. The blood-stained scarf, the strange behaviors, the odd sense of calmness David had shown in the midst of Emma's disappearance. It was all too much. Her gut had been screaming at her for weeks, and now, with every piece of evidence falling into place, Sarah had no choice but to face the terrifying possibility that the man she loved was involved in something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The confrontation was inevitable, but Sarah wasn't ready. How could she be? The idea of facing the man she had trusted with everything, the man she had planned a future with as a killer, was unfathomable. Yet as much as she wanted to avoid it, she couldn't shake the feeling that every moment of delay was allowing David to further entrench himself in his lies. Sarah needed answers, and more than anything, she needed to know whether David was the man she thought he was, or if he had been lying to her all along. That evening, as David came home from work, Sarah was already waiting for him in the living room. Her heart beat in her chest like a drum, each pulse filled with fear and determination. When David entered, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Sarah stood up from the couch, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on him. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but strained. David looked at her, his expression unreadable. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "What's wrong?" Sarah didn't waste any time. She walked toward the coffee table and placed his phone in front of him, the screen illuminated with the incriminating text messages. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him as he saw the messages for the first time. His face paled, his eyes darted around the room, and for a moment he was silent. The air between them felt thick with tension, and Sarah could feel the weight of the truth about to come crashing down. David finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Sarah, I can explain." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She had already pieced everything together. Emma was gone, and David had been involved in her disappearance from the very beginning. There was no explanation that could make sense of what she had seen. He was no longer the man she thought she knew. He was a stranger, someone capable of terrible things. "Don't," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know everything. You were in contact with Jared. You planned everything. You knew where Emma would be, and you—" Her voice faltered as the weight of the words became too much. David stood motionless, his eyes filled with panic. He took a step back, looking around the room as though searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Sarah had already figured out the truth. David's expression shifted then, his defenses crumbling as the reality of the situation hit him. The calm facade he had maintained for so long finally broke. He sank into the chair behind him, his hands shaking. "I never meant for this to happen," he muttered. "It was supposed to be simple, just a way to end it all." The words hung in the air, chilling Sarah to the core. Her stomach churned, and she felt like she might collapse under the weight of it all. David wasn't just guilty of Emma's disappearance. He had planned it. He had manipulated the situation, lured her into a trap, and when things didn't go according to plan, it had spiraled into something even darker. As the confession poured out of David, Sarah felt a wave of revulsion and horror wash over her. He spoke of how Emma had become a threat to their relationship, how he had grown jealous of her new boyfriend and feared that Emma would expose his secrets. He had told himself it was the only way to keep their perfect life intact. But the more he spoke, the more Sarah realized just how far gone David was. He wasn't just a man who had made a mistake. He was someone who had planned, calculated, and ultimately killed to protect his own selfish desires. When David finished his confession, he looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with guilt and fear. He begged her to understand, to forgive him for what he had done. But Sarah couldn't. She couldn't even recognize the man in front of her anymore. The person she had loved was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating murderer. The police were called shortly after. As David was arrested and taken away, Sarah stood in the doorway, numb and empty. Her world had been shattered in a matter of days, and as she watched the man she had once trusted disappear into the back of a squad car, she realized that the truth was more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. Emma was gone, and the man she had once called her partner was the reason why. As the police investigation continued, Sarah was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. She would never be the same. But she knew one thing for sure. She would never again let herself be blinded by love, no matter how perfect it seemed. The world had shown her just how fragile trust could be. And in the aftermath, she was left to rebuild her life from the ashes of a relationship built on lies and deceit.